It's not an island, but you have to take a ferry to get there. In fact, you need to take 5 different ferries to see all of it. We're talking, of course, about BC's Sunshine Coast, a 160-kilometer stretch of waterfront stretching from Howe Sound to Desolation Sound. Now, this idyllic coastline is the subject of a new coffee table style book. Here to talk about the Sunshine Coast from Gibsons to Powell River is author and publisher Howard White. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
So, Howard, this is actually the third edition of the Sunshine Coast. The first one, I believe, was published back in 1996. The
That's
second one,
correct.
the second one as recently as 2011. What's changed in the 13 years between the second edition and this new edition of the book?
Well, it's largely a photographic book. It has an essay on the Sunshine Coast that's about 40,000 words long, but it's a coffee table book with photographs of the whole Sunshine Coast from Langdale to Powell River. So a lot of the history that I wrote about 30 years ago has not changed. It's surprising how much of it is still completely valid, but the look of the place has changed quite considerably. So any photos we had of, the settlements, Gibsons, Seashell, Pender Harbor, Powell River, they all had to be redone because people would look at them and say, well, that's an old photograph. So we refreshed the visual side of the book entirely and got some fabulous new photos. The age of the photographic drone is wonderful. We got terrific photos of overheads of all the communities that we never could afford to get before because you had to hire an airplane. But other than that, yes, there has been changes in the size and the place of resource industries. When I grew up in this town, Pender Harbor, we always described it as a fishing village, and that was true. And in 1996, it was still somewhat true, but now the fishing industry has declined to the point that there's only a few licensed boats left in Pender Harbor, and it's largely a recreational community now. So that sort of stands in for the whole coast. It wasn't all based on fishing back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but a lot of it was also based on the forest industry. And the forest industry has had a similar history. It was dominant in up until the 90s. Now it's become kind of an afterthought in the area, although there's still some people earning their living, but mostly this is now the action is all in real estate and cottages, and of course, ever since COVID, there's been a land rush of people leaving their jobs in the city or bringing their jobs with them because for all its terrible aspects, COVID instructed us that actually we don't have to sit in those offices all day, every day. We can do our jobs just as well from home. And so that has made a big difference to places like the Sunshine Coast that are, relatively close to a big urban center like Vancouver, close enough that people can commute in once or twice a week if they need to, but can otherwise live in the country. And so tremendous number of people have done that, and it's caused quite a real estate boom in this area.
I want to jump off on that briefly, if I could. How have
Sure.
longtime residents of the coast dealt with that influx of new people coming in, those work from homers, as you call them, coming into those longstanding communities?
Well, we're quite happy to see it. As the resource industries declined, the average population age of the Sunshine Coast got older and older and older until we were one of the oldest regional populations in the country. And people were starting to wonder, well, who's going to do the work around here? Who's going to cut the grass? We're all getting too old. And uh, you need a working tax base in order to pay for services and have a vital community. So and our schools were closing, many of them closed, and a lot of the others were declining in enrollment. So we're actually happy to see young families coming back into the area and revitalizing it.
So it's not a case of folks having their peace and quiet disrupted. It's just more people coming and enjoying that peace and quiet for which the Sunshine Coast is so well known.
I don't hear much of that. Over the years there's been grousing from old timers about, oh, the city folks are coming in and they're bringing the city with them and so on. But that's not so much the case today, because we know we need new blood here, and most people welcome it.
Let's dig into the history a little bit here, and there's a lot of it to talk about. For instance, where does the name Sunshine Coast come from?
Well, it's I have a lot of fun poking fun at that. When we started a historical journal aimed at describing the true nature of the Sunshine Coast, we called it Rain Coast, because it is actually we are actually in a rainforest here, and it's rainy much of the year. So the Sunshine Coast is a bit of a misnomer. It was thought up predictably as a promotional title by one of the area's nonstop promoters, a man named Harry Roberts, who was one of the founders of Roberts Creek. And he was having trouble attracting tourists and customers to his store in Roberts Creek from his friends in Gibsons. So he seized on the fact that Roberts Creek is actually in a tiny bit of a rain shadow and gets about 5 millimeters less rain a year than Gibsons. So he wrote a big sign on the freight shed on the steamship dock saying the Sunshine Belt. And after it caught on, the whole rest of the Sunshine Coast, right from Gibsons to Powell River, adopted that name, mostly as a real estate ploy, but it stuck. It's a very unlikely name for a rainforest, but there we are. And I have to say, today it seems right. We have a very sunny day out there.
Now, the Sunshine Coast is perhaps best known, at least to those over the age of 40, for Gibsons, where the TV series The Beachcombers was filmed for 19 seasons. I understand that you have an somewhat intimate connection to how that came to be.
Well, we were publishing Rain Coast Chronicles when Phil Keatley started searching for locations for this new comedy series that he was planning with CBC TV. And he thought that since I was the publisher of the local journal, I should know something about where where would be a good location to start shooting. And he said he was interested in Gibsons. I said, well, that might work, but really Gibsons has become very developed now. If you want a real rural look to your series, you should set it in Egmont, which is an even tinier town right at the north end of the Sechelt Peninsula. So he went up and he checked that out, and he said, "Well, it's a good place, but it's a little hard to get to." And he went ahead with his original plan of locating the Beachcombers and Gibsons. However, when he started a spin-off called Ritter's Cove of the Beachcombers, he did set that one in Egmont, and he made good use of the very folksy rural setting up there. But yes, I was involved right from the start, and an interested observer. I was a little bit dubious about the hokiness of the Beachcombers, as I thought in the very beginning. They scripted it more or less as a, oh, I don't know, a Ma and Pa Kettle kind of typical small town drama. But as the series progressed over 19 years, it became more and more authentic, and in the end, it was very much beloved by everybody here on the Sunshine Coast.
And even today, we still see Molly's Reach in the center of town there, and the Persephone. How does Gibsons handle the notoriety of beachcombers even now?
Well, I think they try to ignore it, but um, they did eventually catch on and realize that this was a huge publicity hook. People would drive into the middle of Gibsons and find themselves staring at the false front of Molly's Reach, and they couldn't believe their eyes. They would have thought, such a famous movie set would, be surrounded by some kind of promotion, but for many years it just sat there. Eventually, it was taken over and turned into a real restaurant, which it was in the movie, of course, but it had never been in real life. When I first came to the Sunshine Coast, that was the local liquor store, and it went through various lives as a general store and a hardware store, and so some entrepreneurs took it over a few years ago and made a very popular restaurant there. Unfortunately, right now it's not active, but it's still standing there as a reminder of the glory days of the Beachcombers. The Persephone was on display in the town center. It's been moved because there's a building going on, but some keeners are restoring it, and they mean to bring it back into a prominent place in one of the local parks eventually.
Now, another thing I wanted to talk about that you touch upon in the book is the Sunshine Coast and its maverick status. You point out that in the past 16 provincial elections, it has voted against the government of the day 11 times, what you call a salty sense of self-possession. Is that part of the reason why you can still only get to the coast by boat or plane? There's still no overland route?
Well, hard to say which came first, the chicken or the egg. I mean, because we are isolated by the ferry system, which becomes more and more isolating as the service declines, that does allow us to sort of keep off to ourselves here and chart our own path in BC politics and history. But um, there's other good reasons why the road has never been built. You'd have to blast through a mountain between Gibsons and Squamish, and no government has ever wanted to spend the money that would take. And I think it'll be a long time before that ever does happen. Although they could certainly improve the ferry service, which has gone way downhill in the past few years. But yes, it's odd. The Sunshine Coast has everything that the Gulf Islands have in terms of, scenery and rural atmosphere, and yet it for some reason it's remained much less known and not as densely settled either. So a lot of us old timers are happy just to keep it that way. We don't want to turn it into a suburb, but we may not have any choice in that matter. It is becoming much more known and much more popular with each passing year.
Well, that book might help that too, I suppose.
Well, yes, it's been out there circulating for almost 30 years now, and I don't even know how many copies it sold, but yes, it's done its part in making us known.
Now, I don't want to let you go without bringing this up as well. This book is coming up at the same time Harbor Publishing is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Did you, in your wildest dreams, ever think you'd still be publishing books a half century later?
Absolutely not. We basically did it one book at a time. We actually started with a small weekly newspaper, uh, and because we were in the printing business, people started bringing us manuscripts, and they were very tiny, unlikely manuscripts in the beginning. Um, and we just were attracted by the idea. We both had day jobs, but the hobby grew and grew and grew. And eventually we quit our day jobs, and eventually we hired a co-op student to come and help us, who still helps us 40 years later. Um, and uh, eventually, we now employ about 25 people all across Canada. And no, we had no notion that would ever happen, and I can't actually explain how it did happen. It just happened.
And remarkably, you're still based out of Pender Harbor.
That's right. That was our first aim, was to find something to do in Pender Harbor with all the resource jobs disappearing. I originally, when we first started, had a small bulldozing business, and I had the contract for maintaining the Pender Harbor garbage dump. And that was how I supported Harbor Publishing for the first 10 years or so. And uh, I, I, I never expected I would be able to park my bulldozer and go full time writing and publishing books. But here we are. It went by in a flash.
Here we are. What do you hope the reader gets out of the Sunshine Coast book?
Well, I hope they get some idea that this is an occupied part of the province that has a quite fascinating history dating back to the mid 19th century in terms of European settlers, and of course many thousands of years before that. We have a quite extensive coverage of the history of the Seashell Nation and the Tla'amin Nation in Powell River in the book. So I'd like them to just realize that yes, it is a beautiful countryside, but it's more than just a pretty face. It has a great deal of extremely interesting history that's fun to read about.
It's a fine place to leave it, Howard. The name of the book is The Sunshine Coast From Gibsons to Powell River, third edition. It's available from Harbor Publishing. My thanks to author and publisher Howard White.
Thank you.